Hello, everybody. We're going to get started. This panel is very exciting about expressions of data resistance and activism. Our illustrious speakers will be talking about the ways in which they're either resisting data or using data as a tool of resistance. We'll start with Peter Njane, who is the director of Ishtar MSN, a community health clinic based in Nairobi, Kenya, that works primarily with the community of men who have sex with men. So, Peter.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning once again. My name is Peter Njane. I come from Nairobi, Kenya, working with an organization called Ishtar MSN. It's a community-based organization that works with men who have sex with men, gay men, particularly. And I'm proud to say that I'm the director. It's an organization that started in 1997. It's an old organization. And it's one of the organizations that started an exclusively gay MSM clinic in Nairobi. I'm gay myself. Coming from African continent, it's not easy to stand and say you're gay. Mm-hmm. And I'm proudly gay man, and I can say that in a relationship for 2 years, but that doesn't mean that I cannot have some good time here in New York. So my organization works, that's on a lighter note. Yeah, my organization works with men who have sex with men, and we work with connection with Ministry of Health. It's not been easy being an African continent, whereby homosexuality is not allowed. It's illegal. In my country, you can be sentenced for 14 years if you're found having sex with another man. Mm. It's a law that we inherited from the British, and I'm sure it's no longer, in Britain it's no longer illegal, but in my country still, and you can be arrested. And with that, we have a lot of fear accessing services. We have a lot of fear coming out. We have a lot of fear of association. We have a lot of fear accessing services, especially health services. People cannot know their health services. You cannot go freely to a clinic or public health facility and say you're a gay man and also access a services with your partner. It's very illegal. So it's that background that I'm here, and I will be giving information of how my country or my organization, in particular myself and other mindset people, whereby we resisted government using, coming up with a research or a survey and using biomarker, particularly biometric, whereby they wanted to do size estimation and knowing our sexual behavior, and they sneaked in that we're gonna use biodata or biomarker for people to be involved in that survey. So we resisted that. As we all know that data is very important. Data is, it informs programming. Data informs what you can do to certain kind of people. But to realize that here we have been working with government, but being in my country, being illegal, and now having a government accessing our people and using biomarker, our fingerprints, to know who we are, what we do, and exactly where you are. So we resisted that. It was not easy because it was a big program. And when we started in this program, initially, biomarker issue was not there, but they sneaked it in toward the end of, when we were coming toward the end of the protocol, and they sneaked it in, and by the time we were realizing it, we were almost starting the project. It was a big project which was supposed to be done in 27 counties in Kenya, which we have 48 counties, but it was supposed to be done in 27 counties. And we refused this by coming together as a group, as an organization, as member of LGBTI. One, we didn't feel it was safe. Secondly, we're in an illegal environment. Thirdly, our community still have a lot of fear. We know in our African continent, government keep on changing every time and then. So we are not sure how this data will be stored, how this data will be safe to our community. So it's something that we organized ourselves as a community and resisted and came up with various strategies of how to counter that. It was not easy because we became the enemy of the state. People have been working together because, like in our clinic, most of the things that we get in and the data that we provide to the government, it informs how to work with we call them the key population. The key population involves men who have sex with men, female sex workers, and people who use drugs. That's how we define in the medical world. And all these people, all these kind of population are criminalized in my country. So when we give access to government organ to have this information about us, where we live, because that it was collecting all that data, we didn't feel it was safe for us. So what we did as a community is coming together, because we formed a consortium of these three populations, whereby we will speak in one voice. And the good thing in my country, at least we are well organized as key population, those populations that I've mentioned. And it was easier for us to speak in one voice, because initially people were not able to come together. And the government organ was very shocked that this key population can come together and speak in one voice. So if you're in Mombasa, these are major cities in the Mombasa, Kisumu, major cities in Kenya, we're able to mobilize our community when they go there in the same voice that's speaking in the capital. Because they used to say that these are maybe people in the capital, people in the bigger city, they can have a say. And we're able to mobilize even people on the grassroots, because even this survey was supposed to be done in the grassroots, that they're able to speak in one voice and say no to this. We didn't refuse for the survey to be done. We wanted the survey. We wanted to know how many, because they're also mapping how many people we are, how many MSM, how many people in Nairobi, how many people in Mombasa. We didn't refuse that, but the way of collecting that data wasn't safe, wasn't useful for us. So that's what was coming out. But how the government people are saying that we are refusing this, we don't want people to know how many we are. Somebody is funding us so that we can have this campaign, more money can be coming to Kenya. We don't want to know how many people we are. But that the message that we are going around saying is that we need the data. The data is one that has informed us to be where we are in the country. Because Kenya is one of the African countries, at least, our people have been able to access services, and people we are working with the Ministry of Health, we have been able to get even Rubicon through the government, through the Global Fund, PEFA. We have been able to have an exclusively, like a clinic that we have in Kenya. Some other African country cannot be able to do that. But that doesn't mean that we are safe. That doesn't mean that we can just let our people being access data, let our people just do biometric, let government know exactly where we are. So it's not been easy, but we were able, it's been still a conversation we are having, and that project was stopped. We were able to even to go to the Geneva, because mostly it was being funded by Global Fund and PEFA. We were able to talk to even Ambassador Briggs of the PEFA and even Geneva, and the program was stopped. And the government was told even to return some of the funds that they had used for that survey. So for me, what I can say is that at least our community were empowered. We knew our rights. We knew what we wanted, and we came together as a community and spoke in one voice, and we were not able, and this survey was not able to happen in Kenya. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Under time. Next, we have Felipe Mesel, who is a lawyer working at ASIG. Is that right?
ASIG.
In Buenos Aires, working on urban conflict issues.
Perfect. Okay, hello everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. Okay, firstly, I would like to talk about a current action research project that we are developing in ASIG, the NGO in which I work, which aims to reflect on legal empowerment practices that have been developed and that are developed right now by communities living in informal settlements in Buenos Aires, the capital city of Argentina, La Paz, the capital city of Bolivia, and Quito, the capital city of Ecuador, in order to reverse urban segregation. The first big challenge that we found in this project was to build a local theoretical framework for the legal empowerment concept. Because though in Argentina and Latin America in general, we have widely developed experiences that can be considered as legal empowerment, at least since the 1970s, we didn't understand the set of practices as legal empowerment. No? For example, during our last dictatorship in Argentina, the 38 families that could resist the massive eviction that was produced by the dictatorship in Villa 31, that is one of the famous one in the city of Buenos Aires, was by the use of law, was with a precautionary measure. So for sure this can be considered as legal empowerment. But in this sense, we are trying to fill this theoretical gap, and we are trying to think the legal empowerment as a way to profane the law. No? And what is to profane the law? Okay, Bourdieu, that is a French sociologist, started to think the law as a field, the legal field. And in this way, there are interests struggling, there are rules there in this field, and there are participants that are competing for the appropriation of a specific capital there, that the capital in the legal field is not the law itself, but the right to say what the law is, what the law means, or what should mean. Those who are participating in this legal field are the professionals, are what Bourdieu called the professionals, the specialists. I mean, judges, representatives, lawyers, and not all of them have the same position in the film to define what the law can mean. But in this sense, we are understanding legal empowerment because the rest of the people that don't belong to the field, those who Bourdieu called the profanes, are affected by the law, but they can't define the terms of that law. So in this sense, we are trying to understand legal empowerment as a way to introduce marginalized people into legal discussions that affect their lives, their daily lives. And we have many examples in Argentina about this. I mean, for instance, the bottom-up process of production of the urbanization laws in Buenos Aires is a very good example of this. Because informal settlements are places that sometimes are located in the center of the cities, next to the richest neighborhoods, but where people don't have access to public services. They have to build their own houses, and not just their own houses, but their own neighborhoods, and where they don't have title to their lands. In Latin America, that is the most unequal and the second most urbanized region of the world, so around 80% of the population lives in cities. In Argentina, 90% of the population lives in cities, and the third part of the Argentinian population is concentrated in the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires. And from the total, 20% lives in informal settlements. So if we only consider the city of Buenos Aires, that is a very rich city, just 10%, because the city of Buenos Aires is autonomous since 1994, and the 10% of the population lives in informal settlements. But taking into account the metropolitan area is 20%. So the situation is hard, but however, as I have said, in the city of Buenos Aires, slum dwellers could design and discuss their urbanization laws. They were not written by technicians. They were the consequence of a synergy between professionals and slum dwellers, and they were in 2010 and in 2016 mainly, and last year also, because each slum has a specific law, urbanization law. But the work of ASIG began in 2002 after a very deep economic crisis in 2001 that we had in Argentina. And we started working with communities, first with public litigation, because some new courts in the city of Buenos Aires were set up and began to be very receptive towards slums demands in a way that was unique in all Latin America. So some relevant leading cases about informal settlements were achieved, mainly in the period 2006-2012. For example, provision of drinkable water and sewer in Villa 31, safe electricity in Villa 2124. We call Villa to the slums, and generally they have a number. The name is a number, like 31, Villa 31, Villa 2124. Then telephone service and garbage collection in Villa 20, and some other trials that were not carried out by ASIG, by our organization, but that were very important, such as regularization of elections in slums, provision of housing in Villa La Dulce, the unconstitutionality of the eviction plan in Villa Rodrigo Bueno, among others. But then there was a second moment for ASIG where we deployed some strategies with the objective of data democratization, so to democratize information and to democratize law. Because at that moment, like 1 or 2 years after we started with public litigation, we realized that public litigation was not enough to solve such structural problems, such human rights violations that probably have like a political and a social cost, and the strategies to face that have to be a consequence of a combination of strategies. So in this sense, and we know that there are some specific problems in translating all the social conflicts into the legal grammar. So we introduced some other strategies, such as the use of technology and participatory mapping, so that neighborhoods could build a bottom-up knowledge about the places with Google Street View in 2016. Before this, the informal settlements were like gray spots in the official maps of the city. So we mapped, and we also did a virtual platform that is called Caminos de la Villa. You can visit it. The website is caminosdelavilla.org.com, where the neighbors can report the lack of services or problems in the provision of some services. And we also created some impact indicators to measure the advance of the works related to the urbanization of villas, the informal settlements urbanizations that are going on right now in the city of Buenos Aires. Also, we focus our efforts in education by doing some legal empowerment leadership courses and popular education workshops. For this year, we are organizing one. And we also try to build organization and alliances. We developed the agreement for the urbanization of villas in 2016 that you can also have access by internet in the website. That is a document that has been agreed by social organizations, academics, civil society organizations, and also some public institutions that contain 10 points about what we understand by real organization that must guarantee, for instance, the right to participation, the right to stay, the right to have access to public services. And finally, like nowadays, we are currently experiencing urbanization processes in 4 informal settlements of the city of Buenos Aires from 2016. The causes of these processes are various, they are complex, but they include the use of law by communities, litigation, lobby, a bottom-up law production of urbanization laws, as I have said. Also, social mobilization. Social mobilization is very important in Argentina, and for example, the cut of streets was a very used direct action taken by communities. But we also must take into account that these processes are also the consequence of economic opportunities for the real estate market that are associated to these processes. I mean, there are around 50 informal settlements in the city of Buenos Aires, and they are having intervention just in 4. And those 4 neighborhoods, they are very close to the richest areas of the city. So the new challenges that we are facing in our intervention has to do, firstly, with monitoring the processes from a human rights approach, to be sure that the participation is guaranteed by the local state of slum dwellers in these processes. So we are participating in the open floor meetings that the local government is organizing, and also the open floor meetings that the neighbors are organizing for themselves. And also one very important challenge we are facing is to think urban and legal instruments that can be useful to prevent gentrification once these neighborhoods are urbanized. So last year we did a complementary document of the agreement to the urbanization of villas about the use and management of urban law that is also in the websites, and you can check. I think that's it. The time is good. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you. So last but not least, we have Tawana Perry, Director of the Data Justice Programming and Research at the Detroit Community Technology Project.
Thank you. We were supposed to turn our backs on you. Count down to your imminent demise, dangle you by the limbs of misdeeds. They wanted us to rate you inferior. Plagued by deteriorating neighborhoods and a convoluted history, you were never supposed to bloom from your ashes. A lot like you have been discarded like debris, deemed useless to naysayers and convictors. Yet you keep rising, clinging to vitality. You refuse to allow statistics to dictate your destiny, and the media will channel your journey. And though some shall remain loyal, others will mock your tribulations. You were combing a young into maturity. Both your gift and your curse, imported from adversity. You've seen better decades, yet you thrive during the worst of them. Your best days have yet to arrive, and though some won't stick around to witness your climb or rejoice in your restoration, your destination is inevitable. You've been on the bottom much longer than most, and the bridges you'll journey won't be easy to coast, but you will make it. And bring warriors with you, armed with devotion. They will defend your dignity and honor your namesake. You are Detroit, the road to progression, the mirror image of endurance, and you hold the key to taking back our democracy. How y'all doing today? So my name is Tawana. I also go by Honeycomb. As you can see, I'm also a poet. So essentially, I'm coming from the perspective of data justice, director of data justice programming for Detroit Community Technology Project, and also a co-lead on our Data Bodies project. Shout out to two of my comrades in the audience, Sita and Hamid. You're gonna hear later from both of them. But we have had, as Black Americans or African Americans, or however you would identify us, potentially 50 or so years of civil and voting rights in this country. Well, I come from a city that for almost 50 years has had a particular dominant narrative about where I come from. So think about that. We've had rights in this country for a little over 50 years, and in Detroit, propaganda has leveraged a pretty massive assault against residents for about 50 years. So if you have heard anything about Detroit for a half century, it's been one particular narrative, right? So I'm 42 years old, don't mind all the white hair, but the city that I come from has 80+% Black residency at 1.90%, so almost 800,000 Black residents. So community members in Detroit experience data systems in a particular way, as you can imagine. And so we've kind of been the experiment for the United States for a very long time. I just want to preface with that. So a part of Detroit Community Technology's work has mostly been through politicizing and informing community members about the impact of their data. And so thinking about how decisions are made about where you come from, your data body, your neighborhood, you as a human being based on your identity. And that's been easy to leverage against Detroiters because most of the world has not helped us to resist those systems. So as part of our Data Bodies project, Detroit being my particular focus, we collaborated on over 130 interviews in Detroit, in LA, and in Charlotte. But in Detroit, we were looking at the impact of water shutoffs, the impact of insecure housing, the impact of public school systems being disinvested in, and those different systems and how they impacted predominantly women-led households, predominantly Black women-led households in Detroit. And we came across a lot of information talking to community members about how they saw systems, how they experienced systems, how their data bodies were leveraged to make decisions in their neighborhood, whether they would get a grocery store or not get a grocery store, whether they would get a school or a school would be closed, whether they would have water or access to internet in their neighborhood. So a lot of decisions were made about community members based solely on how their data was being extracted and leveraged and shared in their community. And so I want to bring a few community voices in here because I feel like I have to do that. And I will also back up and say that I'm on Anishinaabe land living in Detroit, a stolen body on stolen land in Detroit. And so one of the voices I like to bring into the fold is Angelica from Los Angeles. Each institution should deal only with the information it needs. Collection should only capture data that's necessary. They should not intimidate people. They should not violate their human rights. In Charlotte, For their benefit, they do communicate, but for my benefit, no. And in Detroit, my cell phone is a prepaid cell phone. I don't have a contract, so there is no true tie back to my identity. Wherever I can, I minimize me giving someone any of my information if I can. I avoid as many contracts as possible, but I do a lot of direct channel transactions. I don't think that there's anything that you can really do to secure yourself. And so you have community members across all 3 cities feeling insecure when it comes to data. They're thinking about all the ways that data has extracted from them. They're thinking about all the ways that data has been leveraged to make decisions, prevent them from getting housing, prevent them from getting jobs, prevent them from having access to water, prevent them from having access to good schools. And this is the way that community members across all 3 cities have indicated that they are experiencing these systems that extract their data. Another way that they're seeing data is from a community member in Detroit. I mean, your face isn't even your face anymore. Your face is being captured by cameras. So in Detroit right now, we have a project called, we don't have a project, there's a public-private partnership between the Detroit Police Department, Guardian Alarm Company, and Detroit City Government called Project Greenlight. So in the most marginalized communities, they're using surveillance cameras and flashing green lights to capture 24-hour data surveillance and stream it into police headquarters. So you can have a police officer have a mobile app on their phone, and wherever they are, they could be sitting in the bar and they could see those neighborhoods on their cell phone. And so that leverages that negative dominant narrative that Detroiters have been experiencing for, like I said, a half century in Detroit. And when you have experienced that kind of a data extractive propaganda assault against your community, you tend to ask for things that are harmful, right? So if you've been convinced for 50 years that your neighborhood is unsafe, if you've been convinced for 50 years that there is no real safety in your neighborhood, you're gonna ask for security to be a mechanism to protect you. And so one of the things we also learned was about the conflation between safety and security. So a lot of people conflate safety with security. Security is surveillance, security is militarization, security is extra policing, security is cameras, security is this dominant looming narrative that if you add fences and you add protection systems, that you're somehow going to be safer. And what we've learned is that the more security a city adds, the less safe community members are. And so we've learned that community members are safer when they get to know each other, when they have conversation, when they know who their neighbors are, when they take the fences down and don't enter through their garages and actually walk onto the front porch and say hi to one another. We've learned that having public school systems that are thriving is safety. We've learned that minimizing the security mechanisms is safety. And so we've spent a great deal of time politicizing community members so that they can make critical decisions about how they're engaging with data systems and how they resist data systems. And so some of the things that we've done, and when I'm rushed, I tend to be all over the place. But some of the things we've done is we've released the Opening Data 1 zine, an Opening Data 2 zine, Teaching Community Technology Handbook, Rebuilding Community Technology Zines 1 and 2, How to Do a Discotech, which is short for Discovering Technology. That's a tech fair that we have throughout all the districts where we bring communities into the fold of demystifying data and how they can engage systems in a more responsible way. And we've launched through our Data Bodies project, the Digital Defense Playbook, which has exercises like getting them to think about their data. What's in your wallet? So that you can be thinking about, no matter who you are and what demographic you come from, what are the things you're carrying with you that's being extracted from you, that's then those systems are communicating with each other to make decisions about who you are. And that goes across the gamut. I could ask anyone in this room if they collected your eye color, what card is that in your wallet? If they needed to know about your relative, what card is that in your wallet? If those systems communicated to make a decision about your finances, what card is that? If they're gonna make a decision about the relative you used as a reference based on the information you gave, then what access to system is that? So it's getting community members to think about not only their individual selves and data bodies, but how that impacts their community and larger communities. And then also we have flipped the script as an exercise so that community members can be thinking about solutions and some of the ways that they've resisted these data systems. And so all of these resources are available at DetroitCommunityTech.org. You can make a donation and download those PDFs, or you can just download the PDFs, but if you have a donation, we like that, so that we can keep replicating our resources. And then also our databodiesproject.org, where you can download the digital defense playbook. And so most importantly is resourcing community members, is politicizing community members, recognizing that they're the experts but might not have the resources so that they can expand upon the work that they're already doing. And so you're gonna hear a lot more from Hamid, you're gonna hear a lot more from Sita, but it's very important that you think about the community members as the experts, as you heard on the previous panel, but also leverage your resources so that they can expand upon the work that they're already engaged in. And so that's what we're about at Detroit Community Technology Project and our Data Bodies Project. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. The presentations were actually surprisingly connected to one another. So I have a few questions before we open it up to the audience. I realized I forgot to introduce myself. I teach here in the lawyering program at NYU, but my own research actually focuses on the national security space, obviously where questions of privacy are incredibly salient and very pressing at the moment. And so my first question is for all of you, but particularly for Peter. And it's how do you mobilize communities to understand the risks of government use of data? I mean, what are the challenges in particular to doing that? You know, in the United States, you know, there was some discussion a few years ago after Edward Snowden's revelations about the NSA surveillance. And for a while, there was this public discussion about surveillance and the risks that we all take on in disclosing so much of our data and allowing the government to capture so much of our data. But it really died down. Obviously, we're dealing in that context with the entirety of the US population and a different kind of data collection. But what sort of opportunities or challenges have you found in mobilizing a very particular community, right, to really understand the risks of government intervention into their data bodies, as Tawana puts it?
Thank you for that. So we are lucky in the country because we have community mobilizing, we have networks, we have organizations that are working on the ground, on the grassroots, and we have come together. We have two organs that bring us together. Is again Lesbian Coalition of Kenya. This is an LGBT organization that has brought all LGBT organizations together. Then you have the Kenya Consortium of Key Population. This is the MSM, the people who use drugs and female sex workers. Oh, we have a voice. So we have all interconnected in one thing or another. But what happens within the community, how we mobilize them, is like those different networks. We have clustered them. That if it's some region level, whereby they also meet and have a conversation. And whatever we come up together, there's a way that trickles down to those communities. And because being a criminalized population, especially the gay and the MSM, because those are the most vulnerable population, we find that we fear a lot of things. There's a lot of awareness that we bring to our people that you cannot able to just bring, give your data, your information just like that, because most of people are even coming out is an issue, even to yourself. There's an internalized homophobia within yourself. So giving information out there is not easy. But we know because most of what you have done in this community organizing, what you have done, most are being led by the community members themselves. Initially, we had mainstream organization working for us, but for the last like 5 years, community has come up, has been capacity build, and we're able to take our own initiative. So people trust us than any other, and we know where to get this community. So when we say that, when we come up with the strategy, it's able to go down to the grassroots because we are the community taking that message by ourselves, not other people. So we know where to get ourselves, we know where our communities are, and we're able to tell them this is good for us. So that's the kind of strategy I've been able to use. The government, when they realize this, they try to do a divide and rule, whereby they'll go to different regional and making different meetings and try to give the idea about the good use of that data. And it didn't work for them because we have been there, and the same messaging, we tend to keep it across. They are trying to do meetings, and we have tried to cancel those meetings at one particular time. There's a time they wanted to do a meeting all the same time, the same day. And we're able to mobilize our people because we have a WhatsApp group, we have groups that we are able to have conversation together, and we definitely cancel those meetings. So there's a way that we are lucky that we have been able to have conversation within ourselves. Yes.
Do any of you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, okay. That's a big question that we do to ourselves, because in Argentina it's very common that the marginalized population, and not just the marginalized, but we use some formally illegal methods to face oppression. I mean, when the law is not useful to unveil oppression, we must consider, we must reflect about what's our position towards some illegal or formally illegal methods, such as cutting a street, for instance. That is a very well-known direct action that is driven by communities in Argentina. And I think that we must make them know the rights, make them know the risks when they carry out these direct actions, but without paralyzing or colonizing the strategy. So I think that's like the tension. Because if not, I think that one possible problem of legal empowerment can be to empower more the legal field than the marginalized communities. I mean, to bring to the conflict some performances, some languages that are not particular of that conflict, but they belong to the language of law. So I think that sometimes the tension is that, no, you must provide them information about the rights, about the risks they are, because they will face repression, but not to paralyze or to colonize the strategy. I think that's our point of view.
Yeah, similarly, so we believe in coalitions. So Detroit Digital Justice coalition of many organizations in Detroit who are doing this act of resistance and politicizing data. As an example, we recognize that there are over 2,600 open data portals across the US. So everyone has a data portal. Most people don't know there's an open data portal. And a lot of folks that do have access to those data portals are using them for very harmful ways. And so one of the things that we did was offer up equitable recommendations for equitable open data after focus groups and community interviews, and then approach city government and try to leverage that leverage our coalition to get them to be thinking about data in a more equitable way. They adopted some of our recommendations, but it's still an ongoing process. And then another thing is, most importantly, is the politicizing, is everything that we learn, we produce in a document, then we organize those data discotheques so that community members do understand the impact of their data so that they can become advocates for their own, the extraction of their data, how they want to leverage our resources is up to them, but we organize them in each neighborhood, and it is based on a community liaison member who tells us that this is what our neighborhood wants to know, and these are the resources that we need in our neighborhood. And then we bring city government into those data discotheques, and we push back based on what the community members are saying they want us to push back about. And so we have learned, I was resistant a lot at first, but we've learned that we need an inside-outside strategy in communicating with city government, because those decisions are being made whether our community members have access to those systems or not, those systems have access to our community members. And so it's very important that, that we have an inside-outside strategy and that we leverage, that we reinforce the fact that they're the experts and have the solutions.
So I don't think this came up so much in any of the presentations, but Tawana, your discussion sort of triggered this idea for me. How do you think about community collection of data about government, right? So how the community itself begins gathering information about what the government is doing, right? So I think about cop watching, which is the strategy of community members actually surveilling the police and what the police are doing. And it's been a very powerful way for communities to empower themselves using data about the government, right? To push for reforms of policing and these sorts of things. So to what extent is that a part of the work that you do?
Right.
And what are your, sort of generally thoughts about that?
Well, I will say that we are definitely following the lead of Stop LAPD Spying. Shout out to Hamid in the audience. We are definitely following their lead, and I'm excited to hear from him later. But right now, with us facing Project Greenlight, as an example, where there, and I brought some maps to give folks. I don't think I have enough for everyone, but we can share out slides later. But they have over 500, just this year, over 500 businesses who have bought into this pay-for-policing, green lighting surveillance system, flashing green lights, really horrible flashing green lights on these businesses with these surveillance cameras, high-definition surveillance cameras. And so right now, we're in the midst of that research in coalition, and probably in about a week or so, we will have released recommendations for congressional record, as well as some policy recommendations on how to try to slow this thing down. We're in collaboration with BYP 100, Black Youth Project 100 in Detroit, and they've been actively resisting showing up at the police commission meetings and those different things, gathering information, pushing back in Q&A. And so we're doing a data visualization and pulling the police records. They prioritize green light locations as a priority 1 over residents. So if a green light location that is closed for the day gets a police call and they say that it's a Project Greenlight and your house is being broken into 2 doors down, they're gonna go to the Project Greenlight site. And so there's a kind of pay for policing that's happening as well. And so we're pulling all those logs from the open data portal, pulling police records, all the data, the contracts that they're engaged in around facial recognition and all of that. And we have synthesized all that data and we'll be releasing a report very, very soon, probably within a week or so.
Okay, great. Do either of you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think we as a country, something that we as a community have thought about it after all going through this fight with the government, and we have been thinking like most of our data is even currently is government to collect it, although you don't give names, it's only the number, the unique identifying number that you give. But we have been thinking that as a community, we need to start collecting our own data, interpreting that data ourselves. So it's something that's a recommendation that we have been thinking of to do. Yes.
Okay, great. Felipe?
Yeah, collecting data by the communities was very important for us, for not only for public litigation, also to map. I mean, the informal settlements were not mapped by the state, so it was the community who had to do that. And now in the urbanization processes, the opinion of the slum dwellers is highly valued by the government, because they know, I guess they know they are not having an intervention like in a wide space, because the neighborhood has been self-built by communities, so who better than them to define the terms of these urbanization processes?
Okay, great. So why don't we open it up for questions from the audience? Take a couple and then have the panelists answer them. Sure.
Yes, hi, good morning, and thank you all, and thank you for starting with that great poem. What a change of pace. Could you please, Ms. Pezzi, say a little bit more about the Discotheque project? I'm trying to make note of the website, but I didn't want to be looking at it instead of listening to you. So if you could just say a little bit about what that is and how it's used, that'd be great.
Let's take, see if there are one or two other questions, take them and then answer them together.
Don't you find that there's different levels of class resentments in different countries of South America? I mean, the elites in Argentina compared to, let's say, Bolivia is certainly different, and Ecuador is like in between. Wouldn't that sort of get in the way of an overall general strategy acceptable to those nations or different nations in that continent?
Sorry, a strategy about what? A strategy about,
How to deal with those people who aren't in the, let's say, elite or aren't even in the middle class, or the middle class first the elite. I mean, this is definitely different in these places. And more so in even other nations there, Colombia.
Good morning. My name is Anastasia Miller. I'm a fellow at PELNET, Global Network for Public Interest Law, and I'm originally from Kazakhstan. For the last 13 years, I work for grassroots NGO organization. And from my practice, from my experience, I believe that data could be a very powerful tool, but at the same time, it can make us really weak. And my question is, can you talk more about the situations when your data different from official data, and if maybe kind of experience from your work? Thank you.
why don't we start with Tawana?
The data discotheques, and I will say there is a zine online on the site, DetroitCommunityTech.org, that shows you how to discotheque. But again, it's a play on words, short for discovering technology, and it's a fair where, like a tech fair, like your science fair as you would have it, but around technology. So we have station managers who volunteer to man stations and answer community questions, teach them how to access the open data portal, teach them how to access city services, teach them about coding, if you will, teach them about Project Greenlight and different things that they might not have information around. And so those discotheques are catered to each neighborhood based on what the neighborhood asks. And we normally have somewhere between 10 to 20 stations. And so we might even have a city government representative that we hold to task to sit at that station and explain what the open data portal is to community members that come in and talk to them. And so each station is designed for 10 to 15-minute interaction, and then we provide the resources for community members to take with them when they leave. Absolutely. Yep, it looks like a farmer's market, but with tech.
So I think, Felipe, the question to you was about how, whether, and if so how, class resentment issues might impact your legal empowerment strategies.
Okay, yeah, as I have said, we are developing our action research project in Bolivia, Ecuador, and Argentina, and we have different groups that are working in each country. I mean, I don't work in Bolivia and Ecuador, but we are not trying to make like a comparative work because it's impossible. It's totally impossible. I mean, we are trying to reflect collectively about legal empowerment experiences that have very different, they are very different. The scenarios are very different as well. I mean, in Argentina, for instance, the middle class has been much stronger than in the rest of Latin America historically. Now it is, we are like in a complex situation, but historically it has had a stronger middle class than the rest of the countries. For instance, we have like public and free university. I mean, I have studied in a public and free university, and in that sense, for instance, I know that in the USA and in other countries, you have a lot of work related to paralegals and legal empowerment, and in Latin America, we have not that. Probably in the Argentinian case, because there are many people from communities, from marginalized places that they have access to public and free university until now. So the best universities of Argentina, I think, one of the best, are public. And that changed the map. No? Probably in Bolivia and Ecuador, the situation is hardest. I mean, it's harder to have access to some essential rights, such as in Argentina, and the self-construction, for instance, is wider than in Argentina as well. So we are in different environments, and probably, the situations are different, but we are trying to reflect on the advantages and disadvantages of legal empowerment practices in informal settlements of these 30 very different countries, because Latin America is not one, it's very complex, it's very varied. In the case of Argentina, for instance, the biggest part of the society belongs to European immigration, and there are many natives, but for instance, we don't have such a big black population as in Brazil or in some other countries of Latin America. So each single country of Latin America is very special, it's very particular, and I can speak more about Argentina than the rest of the countries because I don't have the tools to speak about the rest of the countries. I mean, Brazil or Mexico, I don't know.
So I think the last question, and correct me if I'm wrong, is about the ways in which the data you're gathering about your communities can be used or may be used to disempower those communities. How you think about that in terms of how you gather the data, what sort of data you gather. Is that your question or no?
Oh, you want me to start?
Sure.
Well, first off, we leverage, it's community voice, which a lot of times government statistics aren't community voice, it's statistics. And so one of the ways that our community members have said that they've experienced data extraction is that they are solely being looked at for their worst decisions or their stats or their data or their income or their, some figure about them that is not who they are. And so the difference in the way we collect the data is it's the community voice. It's literally community saying, this is how I've been experiencing data, this is how I don't want to experience data. And these are the ways that I've been navigating those systems that did not take my humanity into consideration when making their decisions. And so it's still a balance because that's why we use pseudonyms, not real names of community members and those sorts of things, because we do understand that it's still their information. But yeah, we try to shy away from it being like a statistical type of framework based on maybe the worst 2-second decision somebody made in their life. And so we're leveraging it in a way that gives voice back to community members. And I just want to briefly say another thing I brought here was magazines. I co-founded a magazine called Riverwise Magazine that is also community stories and community voices of resistance and resilience. And so just every opportunity to counter the dominant narrative that has plagued, particularly Detroiters, but and I'll lastly say the reason why I center Detroit so much, not only because I was born and raised there, but because I really feel like if we can counter the dominant narrative in Detroit, we can resist anti-Black racism globally. And so that's one of the reasons why I consistently try to be part of projects that leverage and uplift a Black voice in a way that is not the dominant narrative of how we've been seen.
Okay, for me, I can say that, as I said in my opening remarks, was that I think data is very important for our programming. Data also informs who we are. Initially, we were not in the national strategy, especially for HIV, because nothing was captured about the key population, about the gay men, particularly in Nairobi. So it was through data, it was through survey and research that was done in Nairobi, and whereby 500 men were interviewed. And the national strategy came and said, wow, these people exist in the country because they never thought that we exist. So we used that data, we used that survey, that research for us to be included in the national strategy. So sometimes we argue about data, but how good use is that data? How was that data captured? So is it safe for our community? So that data was captured. We were able to be included in the national strategy, whereby we pushed until now that we have. Initially, they used to only capture on the general population, but now we have been able to be captured in the national data that we exist. Men who have sex with men exist in the country. So I think for us was an added plus to be part of that structure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sometimes in our daily work, we have experienced some conflicts related to the immediate interests of slum dwellers and what we consider is like a long-term interest, mainly related to gentrification, for instance. In this specific discussion, I think we are losing because the government generally says, okay, I will give you the land titles and you are going to be, and that's how I'm going to guarantee the right to stay in your land. And generally slum dwellers think that's true. I mean, like I want my title as in my land title as in as the rest of the citizens of the city. I mean, I deserve it, it's a right, and I think that's true. But if you don't think about the terms of that land title, probably you are introducing that piece of land into the real estate or the formal real estate market, and there are some long-term consequences that can threaten the right to stay of the communities. So in this, there are some discussions or some debates in which we are having some tension between what the neighbors want immediately and what do we think is the best. So sometimes there are some tensions related to that.
More questions?
Thanks. My question is to Peter. You mentioned very briefly that you use WhatsApp to mobilize. And I know that in many communities, especially in Africa where populations are criminalized, social media becomes a mobilizing space. But increasingly also, we're seeing governments clamp down on it. I know one of your neighboring countries. Have you had an experience in Kenya, and how safe do you find those platforms still remain for mobilizing communities and organizing?
Thanks. My question's for Tawana and for Peter, actually. I didn't know you were going to be here. I recommend everybody read the playbook. And even if you're just sitting in your living room doing some of the exercises on your own, it's really valuable. But my question is, a lot of the at-risk communities that are sort of most vulnerable to malign uses of their data, using sort of good digital hygiene risks further marginalizing them. So you read a quote about a prepaid cell phone. The decision to go unbanked is another example. There's a movement in Baltimore to force some businesses to take cash because a lot of them are stopping taking cash. So I understand the engagement at a political level and your pushback against city government, but what do you tell your communities at a personal level how they manage their data on a day-to-day basis to balance those two sort of competing problems or reinforcing problems, I guess?
Yeah. Okay.
There's a hand back there, I think. Was there? No longer? There, yeah, there it is. Okay.
Somewhat relating to that, Ms. Petty, you've spoken so eloquently about how community members navigate sites of data extraction. I wondered if there's discussion relating specifically to the census regarding that.
Okay. Tawana, do you want to get started?
So two things. I'll lift up thank you for the shout out for the playbook, first of all. Secondly, my team also has what's called the Equitable Internet Initiative. And so more than 38% of Detroiters don't have access to broadband. If you're in a really super marginalized neighborhood in Detroit, it's even higher, up to 60%. And so we do believe in access, right? So we train digital stewards. They go through a 20-week process of how to become responsible stewards of information and data, and then they leverage that to bring community members into the fold of having access to the internet. So things that get taught with that is consentful technology, how to be a responsible steward. We have digital justice principles, which are modeled off the environmental justice principles. And then we have equitable internet initiative principles that are modeled off the digital justice principles. All of these through community-centered focus groups and interviews that then we come together and collectively define these principles. And so we're not telling community members not to engage or have access, but what we are trying to do is create a culture of consentful technology, a culture of responsible stewardship, a culture of recognizing how your data body is not just an individual thing, that there is an impact that it has on your community, your neighborhood, all the people that you leverage to get a particular resource. It is really a chain effect. And so just thinking about how we can create the best culture that we can within those systems, not saying that they should opt out of them. I mean, people, some of them have not been in those systems because of marginalization, but one thing that we do tell them is just because you don't have access doesn't mean they don't have access to you. And so you have to be thinking in a particular way. With regard to the census, we are definitely in the height of leveraging our discotheques and our Equitable Internet Initiative to bring community members into politicization around the census, not telling them that they have to engage in the census, but helping them to understand the impact of opting out or opting into the census. So our next 8 discotheques are focused on the census particularly. And so we'll have stations there, we'll have folks from the city there, we'll have community activists there, we'll have this system we call Music Box, where we capture the interviews of community members and how they've experienced the census, why they've opted out of the census, so that we can then cater information around that. And so we're doing a lot of organizing all of the rest of this year into 2020 around the census.
Peter?
Yeah, thank you, Kenneth, for that question. And it's true, most of our mobilization we do through social networks, the WhatsApp, the Facebook, and we know all those kind of social networks are not safe. And coming from an African continent whereby it's one of the cheapest way to give, or it's faster, it's cheaper to give information and people to get that information quickly and faster. It has worked for us, unfortunately, and nothing wrong has happened to us, but we know some of us activists, some of our phone has been tapped before, and sometimes it's risky. I know of a situation whereby some of our members, certain partners were being alleged of being homosexual, being gay, and when they were arrested, their phones were found to have them recorded themselves having sex. So those kind of situations have happened too, and what we're doing to our community, we have gone through some digital training so that they can know how to store data in their phone, what to do on those encrypted messages, but it's not enough. We cannot tell this training cannot be happening to everyone. It's maybe most of the activists or media activists in the country, but it has worked for us because it's one of the cheapest way to give information to our people, and nothing has happened. I think government are busy with themselves, give themselves big salaries and everything than us, but it will somehow even cut us. So I think we just need to be aware and alert of the situation. Yeah.
More questions?
I just want to ask Ms. Petty, do you help through those technical fairs you have, do you have the people set up mesh networks? Are you familiar with what a mesh network is? Do you find them successful? Do they work, or?
Okay. I think we're waiting for.
Any other questions?
I think maybe go ahead and just answer that while we.
Okay. So in 2012, we connected with Mesh Networks through the neighborhoods, through 3 neighborhoods in Detroit. Now we have advanced a bit to fiber because fiber came into the city. And so, so our community members tried to, our Equitable Internet Initiative is based on fiber, interacting with fiber in the city and bringing digital stewards into the fold on those systems, but we still have our mesh network systems as well. I'll just briefly say, so with the mesh in 2012, we went to different neighborhoods and got community members to volunteer to have us place nodes on their residents so that we could spread out internet to neighbors who didn't have access. Now, when the fiber came into the city, we approached Rocket Fiber to try to get a community benefit agreement with them entering the city with their fiber. We were not successful, but we did purchase fiber wholesale, and we were able to advance out into further, more neighborhoods. Now, we got a little bit of publicity, and 123Net approached us, so we were able to cut out Rocket Fiber, and now we're able to expand to even more neighborhoods, and we're doing that not just in Detroit, but we're trying to expand that globally in rural areas that don't have access to the internet as well. And so, so we're replicating our models and trying to make this equitable system be something that can be replicated everywhere. But yes, we are connected to mesh in several neighborhoods as well as fiber.
Any more questions? Any final thoughts from the panelists?
I think for me, what I can say is that through my experience of this resistance, it has taught me that it's good to capacity build community whereby they can be able to speak for themselves. I remember initially in my country whereby most of the decision making about our community was being done by people just sitting on the board and making decisions for us. But through time, we've been capacity build, doing what's our right. We have been able to speak for ourselves. We've been able to venture into those spaces, into those boardrooms, and having a say in those boardrooms, in those, and even with government, and having an argument with government, say this is not good for our community. And even that huge project that was supposed to be done to Kenya, the government was told to return the money. I think for me, it was a major awakening that we need to capacity our community, especially those vulnerable, those marginalized community, whereby nowadays most of the decisions being made, we are there on the table. I'm a board member of the Global Fund in Kenya, whereby most of the decisions made about our community, we are there. So I think for me, I would like to say that through these whole experiences, it has taught me that when you also speak in one voice, when communities come together and organize and speak in one voice, is very, very important. Thank you.
All right, that's a wonderful note to end on. So a round of applause for our speakers, please.